For nearly 4 decades, the Saab Yas-39 Gripen was a ghost of modern air power. Sleek, efficient, respected in theory, but unblooded. Since its maiden flight in 1988, the world's military analysts asked one question over and over: could this Scandinavian lightweight ever prove itself against real fire? Or would it remain the budget alternative to America's F-35 and Russia's Su-35? Impressive on paper, but irrelevant in war. In July 2025, that question was answered in fire and steel, and the shock is still echoing through defense ministries across the world. During a brief but fierce border war between Thailand and Cambodia, the Gripen finally entered combat for the very first time. Royal Thai Air Force pilots flew precision strike missions against Cambodian artillery, dropping laser-guided bombs with deadly accuracy. For 5 days, from July 24th to 28th, the Gripen went from unproven export fighter to combat-proven NATO weapon. It was the jet's historic baptism by fire, and its success sent a chill through every military planner who once dismissed it. Why does this matter? Because Sweden is no longer neutral, no longer sitting quietly in the shadow of superpowers. Since joining NATO in March 2024, Sweden has transformed itself from a passive northern state into a frontline military power, committing warships, troops, and nearly a quarter of its entire fighter fleet to NATO operations. The world expected Sweden to be cautious, restrained, hesitant to antagonize Russia. Instead, it has gone all in, raising defense spending to nearly 3% of GDP, rushing advanced drone defense systems into combat service, intercepting Russian reconnaissance planes over the Baltic, and integrating its air force directly into NATO's Eastern Front. And now, with the Gripen's successful combat debut, Sweden has shattered the last lingering doubt about its military value. This wasn't just a symbolic moment. This was NATO's nightmare. And Russia's too. Because what NATO feared most wasn't Sweden being weak. It was Sweden being too strong, too fast. In just 18 months, Stockholm has become the alliance's newest spearhead. A nation once mocked for neutrality is suddenly a military disruptor, fielding a jet that proves a smaller, cheaper fighter can stand tall in real combat. And the shockwaves are global. Countries like Colombia and the Philippines are now looking harder at buying Gripens. Ukraine's government has openly hinted it expects to receive them. Russia is scrambling to explain why its Baltic dominance looks weaker by the day. And America's allies, locked into trillion-dollar F-35 programs, are asking whether they underestimated the Scandinavian challenger. So the question is no longer whether the Gripen can fight. That's been answered over Cambodian skies. The question now is, what happens when a fighter NATO once saw as second tier becomes its frontline warplane in the most dangerous theater on Earth? The Baltic, staring directly at Russia's borders. The age of neutrality is over. The age of the Gripen has begun. How does a nation go from centuries of neutrality to the sharp tip of NATO's spear in under 2 years? For Sweden, the answer is both shocking and deliberate. This isn't just a policy shift, it's a total transformation of identity. A nation once proud of staying out of global wars has now armed itself, aligned itself, and positioned itself as a frontline power against Russia. The trigger was clear. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 shattered Europe's illusions about peace. For decades, Sweden had managed to live in the geopolitical shadows, balancing trade, diplomacy, and quiet self-defense. But neutrality collapsed under the weight of Russian aggression. When Finland applied for NATO membership in 2022, Stockholm knew it could not stand alone. The Baltic had changed forever. So in March 2024, Sweden formally joined NATO. On paper, it was a quiet accession. In reality, it was the most significant military shift in Northern Europe since the end of the Cold War. Overnight, NATO gained a strategic coastline, access to the Arctic approaches, and, most importantly, a nation willing to spend, fight, and integrate at breakneck speed. If you're enjoying this deep dive, please like the video and consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us bring more global insights. Now, back to the video. Sweden did not tiptoe into the alliance, it leapt. By September 2024, Stockholm announced it would commit 1,200 troops, 6 warships, and 24 fighter jets, nearly a quarter of its entire fighter force, to NATO missions through 2025. That's not the behavior of a cautious new member. That's the behavior of a country determined to prove itself indispensable. The symbolism was powerful. For decades, Sweden fielded a highly capable military but kept it bottled up, only rarely working with NATO in joint exercises. Now, its warships patrol the Baltic under NATO command. Its Gripen fighters sit ready on Polish runways. Its Arctic forces train with Norwegians, Finns, and Americans in conditions designed to push men and machines to the limit. And behind these deployments is a budget that speaks louder than words. Sweden now spends 2.8% of its GDP on defense, already above NATO's 2% benchmark. Plans are in motion to hit 3.1% by 2028, a level rivaling the US and Poland, the alliance's most hawkish spenders. Neutrality has been replaced by militarization, and Sweden isn't apologizing for it. This aggressive transformation was not lost on Moscow. Russia had long relied on Swedish neutrality as part of its security calculus in the Baltic. A neutral Sweden meant a gap in NATO's shield. A neutral Sweden meant Russian dominance of the sea lanes and airspace between Kaliningrad and St. Petersburg. But NATO-Sweden integration has closed that gap. And for Russia, that's a strategic nightmare. In less than 2 years, Sweden has gone from cautious bystander to NATO's forward operating edge. Its geography places it at the center of Baltic tensions. Its navy adds teeth to NATO's maritime presence. And its air force, armed with the Gripen, is now positioned as a vital counterweight to Russian Su-35s and bombers. But all of this buildup begged one question. Would Sweden's pride and joy, the Gripen, ever actually fight? For all its hype, the jet had zero combat history. And in the ruthless world of military credibility, theory means nothing until the first bomb falls, the first missile is fired, the first warplane returns with battle scars. That answer came in July 2025, thousands of miles away, in a border war no one expected would matter, until the Gripen rewrote history. And when it finally happened, when the Gripen roared into its first real war, the shock was immediate. The world watched as a fighter once dismissed as a budget option turned into a combat-proven weapon. The Gripen's first kill was not just Cambodia's loss, it was the world's awakening. Can a fighter jet remain a legend on paper for nearly 40 years and still earn respect the first time it enters war? That's exactly what Sweden's JAS 39 Gripen just did. For decades, critics labeled it the underdog jet. Cheaper than the American F-35, less intimidating than Russia's Su-35, and without the fear factor of China's J-20. It was sleek, reliable, loved by pilots, but it had one glaring weakness. It had never drawn blood. That changed in July 2025, during the brief but explosive border war between Thailand and Cambodia. When artillery fire erupted near the disputed Hu Ma Kua Ridge and Tam Muan Tam Temple, the Royal Thai Air Force made a decision that would rewrite history. Alongside their veteran F-16, Thai commanders deployed the Gripen C/D fleet, purchased from Sweden years earlier, but never before tested in combat. For 5 days, from July 24th to July 28th, the world finally saw what the Gripen could do under fire. The results shocked even seasoned defense analysts. Flying precision missions against hardened Cambodian artillery positions, Thai pilots used laser-guided bombs and precision munitions with surgical accuracy. In one operation, a Cambodian artillery battery was destroyed in minutes, its fire silenced before it could threaten Thai positions again. The Gripen not only delivered, it did so with remarkable efficiency, operating in the brutal humidity and rugged terrain of Southeast Asia without a hitch. This wasn't just another airstrike, this was a baptism by fire. 37 years in the making. The Gripen's first kill transformed it overnight from the untested export fighter into a combat-proven weapon of war. Military credibility is unforgiving. Many aircraft look unbeatable in air shows and simulations, only to falter when the first missile streaks across a battlefield. The Gripen, however, cleared that bar on its very first outing, and it wasn't just Thailand that benefited. Sweden, and by extension NATO, suddenly had a jet with battle credentials. The conflict itself was brief, ending with a ceasefire on July 28, 2025, but the symbolic weight was massive. Cambodia retreated, Thailand declared success, and the Gripen returned to base not as an experiment, but as a proven predator. Why does this matter globally? Because every air force in the world was watching. For countries considering the Gripens, from Colombia and Latin America to the Philippines and Asia, the message was clear. This jet works. And for Russia, which now faces Gripens on its Baltic borders, the warning was even louder. Underestimating Sweden's fighter just became a deadly mistake. But the biggest impact wasn't in Asia, it was in Europe. Inside NATO war rooms, the Gripen's combat debut landed like a thunderclap. A fighter that had never fired a shot in anger had just joined the ranks of combat-tested machines. Suddenly, Sweden's rapid militarization didn't look like theory. It looked like reality. And so, while Cambodia licked its wounds, Europe sat up straight. If the Gripen could dominate over Southeast Asia, what would it mean when squadrons of them began flying from Polish runways, Baltic bases, and Arctic outposts? The answer lay in NATO's most vulnerable front, the Baltic Sea, where Sweden was about to redraw the map of power. For Moscow, it means the nightmare they always feared is no longer hypothetical. For NATO, it means the alliance has grown sharper, faster, and far more dangerous. Sweden's accession to NATO in March 2024 was historic enough. A nation that had stood neutral for centuries, suddenly joining the most powerful military alliance in the world, was a seismic event in European security. But the real shock wasn't in the signing ceremony. It came in 2025, when Sweden moved from quiet ally to frontline enforcer almost overnight. By September 2024, Stockholm pledged to contribute 1,200 troops, 6 warships, and 24 fighter jets, nearly a quarter of its entire Gripen fleet, to NATO missions through 2025. That wasn't symbolic, that was total integration, and NATO wasted no time testing it. In March 2025, 6 Gripen fighters deployed to Malbork Air Base in Poland. It was the first time in history that Swedish jets flew combat patrols outside their borders under NATO command. From there, they launched air policing missions, intercepting Russian aircraft probing Baltic skies. One confrontation in September 2025 made global headlines when Swedish Gripens and German Eurofighters intercepted a Russian Il-20M reconnaissance aircraft after it brazenly violated Allied airspace. Moscow fumed, but the message was clear. The Baltic skies no longer belong to Russia alone. At sea, Sweden's navy became just as aggressive. 6 advanced warships joined NATO's Baltic Sea Fleet, reinforcing maritime choke points that Russia relies on for access to Kaliningrad and St. Petersburg. Add to this Sweden's new surveillance legislation, expanding Coast Guard powers to monitor undersea cables and airspace, and suddenly the Baltic was no longer a gray zone. It was locked down. But perhaps the most shocking move came with technology. In late 2025, Sweden deployed its Loki counter-drone system to NATO bases in Poland. Transitioning from prototype to battlefield in just 84 days, the system gave NATO a direct edge against Russia's drone warfare strategy. What Russia had weaponized in Ukraine, cheap, swarm-capable drones, could now be detected, jammed, and neutralized in the Baltics. Why does this matter? Because NATO's greatest vulnerability has always been its northeastern flank. Tiny Baltic states like Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia were always seen as the soft underbelly, indefensible against Russian speed and force. But with Sweden in NATO, that calculation is dead. Suddenly, NATO can strike from the north, locking Russia into a two-front trap in any Baltic war scenario. This is why NATO generals call Sweden a force multiplier. It's not just another ally, it's a northern shield that turns the Baltic Sea from a Russian threat zone into a NATO fortress. For Moscow, this isn't just uncomfortable, it's terrifying. Russian military planners now face an expanded battlefield, one that stretches from the high north to the Baltic Sea, bristling with NATO teeth. Every step they take risks running into a Swedish Gripen, a Finnish artillery battery, or a NATO fleet reinforced by Stockholm's warships. But NATO's new strength in the Baltic is only one part of the story. The real firestorm came when whispers began about sending Gripens east, not to guard NATO skies, but to Ukraine itself. And that possibility, even if only future-focused, is the kind of trigger that keeps Russian generals awake at night. What happens when whispers of a fighter jet reaching Ukraine are enough to make Moscow rethink its entire air strategy? That is the dilemma Sweden has created. In September 2025, Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister Ivan Hrylyuk told the BBC that Kiev was expecting Swedish Gripen fighters. The statement sent shockwaves through European capitals and Russian military headquarters alike. Within hours, Swedish officials were forced to clarify. No agreement had yet been reached, but the damage, strategically speaking, had already been done. The Gripen, combat-proven in Thailand, now existed in the public imagination as a potential game-changer for Ukraine. For a Russian command already stretched thin by the war in Donbass and the ongoing conflict in the east, the very possibility of Gripens entering Ukrainian service was enough to cause deep anxiety. Swedish Defense Minister Pål Jansson quickly tried to temper expectations. Any future transfer, he said, would be post-war, long-term, and focused on rebuilding Ukraine's air force. Still, Sweden had already approved $214 million in Gripen spare parts for potential Ukrainian use. That's not a promise of aircraft, but it's a clear signal. Sweden is prepared to support Ukraine, and it is doing so with air superiority in mind. The implications are enormous. A Gripen-equipped Ukraine would no longer rely solely on Western F-16s or older Soviet-era jets. Its air force could operate independently, leveraging a modern, agile, multi-role fighter capable of precision strikes, electronic warfare, and rapid deployment from austere airfields. That changes the calculus for Moscow entirely. For NATO, even without a confirmed transfer, the situation is a strategic masterstroke. Sweden has created ambiguity that stretches Russian planning resources. Russian commanders must now account for Gripens in Ukrainian hands as a potential future threat. Even the suggestion of their presence forces Moscow to divide air defense assets, reposition troops, and rethink regional air dominance. Yet Sweden's caution is deliberate. By refusing immediate transfer, Stockholm avoids direct confrontation while signaling that it has the capability and intent to project air power in Eastern Europe. The Gripen, in this sense, becomes both a weapon and psychological tool, a northern ghost fighter that haunts Russian military planning. The world is watching. Analysts in Brussels and Washington are noting the subtle shift. Sweden is no longer a peripheral NATO member, it's now a strategic lever, capable of influencing outcomes far beyond its borders, even without firing a single missile in Europe. And this is just the beginning. Even as the Ukraine debate simmers, Sweden's Gripens continue to operate across NATO air policing missions, Baltic surveillance, and Arctic training exercises. Their presence, and the potential for future transfers, ensures that every Russian move in the region is now shadowed by the Gripen. And still, how did a small Scandinavian nation suddenly become the industrial engine driving NATO's northern defense? The answer is Sweden's defense sector, and it's more than just Gripen jets. This is a country that has leveraged decades of engineering expertise, innovation, and strategic foresight to become a force multiplier for the alliance. First, consider the numbers. Sweden now spends 2.8% of GDP on defense, already exceeding NATO's 2% benchmark. Plans are in place to reach 3.1% by 2028, putting Stockholm on par with the most committed European allies. That's extraordinary for a country of only 10 million people. Every krona is carefully invested into advanced fighter jets, electronic warfare systems, drones, surveillance infrastructure, and rapid response technologies. The Gripen itself is the centerpiece. Long criticized as a budget fighter, the jet now boasts combat experience, operational readiness, and versatility that rivals far costlier platforms like the F-35. Gripens can operate from small, austere airstrips, require fewer support systems, and can integrate seamlessly with NATO command networks. That combination of affordability, reliability, and lethality is a wake-up call to traditional procurement-heavy allies, and the ripple effect is global. Colombia is already evaluating Gripen acquisitions. The Philippines is reconsidering its fighter plans after watching the Gripen's precision strikes in Thailand. Sweden's combat debut has turned what was once a niche European fighter into a globally relevant military asset. Beyond aircraft, Sweden's industrial base is a shock to NATO's internal dynamics. Its rapid deployment of the Loke counter-drone system, from prototype to operational use in just 84 days, demonstrates a level of efficiency and innovation that many allies struggle to match. This ability to translate R&D into field-ready systems is changing NATO's expectations about speed, adaptability, and technological readiness. Strategically, this industrial surge is matched by Sweden's geography. Its Baltic coastline, Arctic access, and proximity to Russian exclaves make it a critical strategic pivot. Gripens flying from Swedish air bases can reach critical points in the Baltic and Arctic faster than any conventional force, creating a deterrence effect that is both psychological and operational. The industrial shock isn't just about production, it's about influence. Sweden is reshaping NATO's procurement culture, showing that smaller, highly innovative nations can punch above their weight. Gripen's success challenges assumptions that military supremacy is solely a function of budget or size. Instead, it's about precision, adaptability, and foresight, qualities Sweden has cultivated for decades. For Russia, this is a nightmare. Not only does the Kremlin face Gripens in NATO airspace, but the very industrial efficiency behind these jets means Sweden can sustain operations, supply spares, and upgrade systems faster than many larger nations. Moscow's calculations for regional dominance have suddenly become far more complicated. And yet, all of this capability, innovation, and strategic positioning leads directly to the fear Moscow can't hide. The Gripen is now a direct threat to Russian operational plans, particularly in the Arctic and Baltic choke points, where Sweden's new military posture has rewritten the rules of engagement. For decades, Russia relied on the Baltic Sea as a strategic buffer zone. Its western flank, stretching from Kaliningrad to St. Petersburg, was dominated by Russian air and naval assets, and NATO was largely on the defensive. But today, the rules have changed. Sweden has deployed warships, Gripens, and advanced drone defenses, creating a forward line that Russia cannot ignore. The Gripen's combat debut in Thailand only amplified Moscow's anxiety. A fighter that was untested in war and considered a secondary option by many analysts had proven lethal and precise. That means Russian strategists can no longer assume any lightly defended zone in Europe is secure. The Gripen is battle-proven, fast, and highly adaptable, capable of striking key assets, disrupting supply lines, and challenging air supremacy at a fraction of the cost of traditional fighters. Adding to the worry is Sweden's commitment to NATO integration. By contributing troops, ships, and aircraft to alliance operations, Stockholm ensures that any Baltic confrontation would not be bilateral. It would immediately invoke collective defense. Moscow now faces the prospect of Gripens operating alongside F-35s, Eurofighters, and NATO naval assets, all coordinated under unified command. Even the Ukraine factor adds to Russia's discomfort. The very suggestion that Gripens could be supplied to Ukraine, even on a post-war timeline, forces Russia to account for a potential future where its southern and western airspace is challenged by Sweden's combat-proven jets. It's a strategic chess move. Sweden doesn't need to deliver the aircraft today. The mere possibility forces Russian planners to reconsider deployments, force ratios, and defensive positions. Operationally, the Gripen brings tactical flexibility that traditional Russian calculations struggle to counter. It can operate from smaller bases, adapt to rapidly changing scenarios, and coordinate effectively with NATO's multi-layered air and missile defense systems. That means Moscow cannot rely on numbers alone. It must account for technology, integration, and speed, all areas where Sweden now excels. Finally, Sweden's innovative defense industry compounds the threat. The rapid deployment of the Loker counter-drone system, along with Gripen upgrades and Baltic surveillance enhancements, demonstrates that Sweden can adapt faster than Russia can respond. In a modern conflict, where speed, precision, and technological advantage are decisive, this makes Sweden a serious adversary despite its relatively small population. In short, Russia's nervousness isn't just about planes, it's about a paradigm shift in regional power dynamics. The Gripen symbolizes Sweden's transformation, NATO's strengthened northern flank, and a new era of unpredictability. Moscow now faces a multi-dimensional threat that touches air, sea, and electronic warfare domains simultaneously. Sweden's transformation from a neutral Scandinavian state to a frontline NATO powerhouse is not just remarkable, it is shaking the foundations of European security. For decades, the Gripen existed in theory, a reliable, efficient fighter with potential, admired but never tested. That ended in July 2025, over Cambodian skies, when the Gripen finally demonstrated its lethality in combat. The implications were immediate, undeniable, and global. What makes this moment extraordinary is not just that the Gripen fought, it's that Sweden has leveraged this jet, and its entire defense infrastructure, to rewrite regional power equations. From the Baltic Sea to the Arctic, Stockholm has demonstrated a capacity for rapid deployment, technological innovation, and strategic foresight that rivals larger, more established powers. With warships patrolling critical sea lanes, Gripens flying air policing missions in Poland, and counter-drone systems operational in record time, Sweden has positioned itself as both a deterrent and a disruptor. The Gripen's combat debut also serves as a psychological weapon. Allies and adversaries alike now recognize that Sweden is willing and capable of projecting force far beyond its borders. NATO gains are obvious. A new, agile Spearhead in the north, capable of rapid strike, effective defense, and high adaptability. For Russia, the threat is tangible. Forward deployed Gripens, integrated forces, and industrial agility that can outpace conventional calculations. Even the mere suggestion of Gripens in Ukraine adds strategic pressure, forcing Moscow to plan for futures that may never arrive. Sweden's broader defense posture underscores a critical lesson for global military strategy. Size isn't everything. What matters is integration, innovation, and execution. Sweden has turned its relatively small population, industrial base, and defense budget into a concentrated punch that NATO and the world cannot ignore. The Gripen is more than a fighter. It is the symbol of Sweden's strategic rise and NATO's expanded capabilities. Yet this is only the beginning. Sweden's ambitions, backed by technological sophistication and a commitment to alliance obligations, suggest a new era of Northern European security. The Baltic is no longer a backwater, it is a fortified front line. The Arctic is no longer a quiet zone, it is a contested space where Sweden now has influence. And Gripens, flying from bases across NATO territory, represent a multi-dimensional threat that combines deterrence with operational readiness. The world is watching, and so is Moscow. The Gripen has already rewritten conventional thinking about fighter jets, alliances, and rapid military transformation. Sweden's success demonstrates that a small, innovative, and bold nation can alter global defense calculations in ways far beyond its borders. The question now is no longer if Sweden can make an impact, it's how far will Stockholm push this advantage, and how will NATO and its rivals respond. One thing is certain, the age of the Gripen has begun, and with it, a new chapter in European security that will be studied, debated, and perhaps feared for decades to come. Sweden has crossed the threshold, its Gripens are in the air, and the world, as allies and adversaries alike, will never see Northern Europe the same way again. If you found this analysis valuable, please consider subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into geopolitics. We would love to hear your thoughts. Drop your comments below and let us know what you think. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.